So I'm sitting here in a hotel room in Nashville, Tennessee, and I got to tell you, I don't know what's worse at the moment. The lighting in this room is awful, that's a given, but it's contributing to the fact that I haven't slept all night, and the two factors I'm weighing here as I'm watching myself here in the camera is that one, the bags under my eyes. I mean, yes, I haven't slept all night, but my God, the dark circles and stuff, the lighting's not helping there. And two, can you tell it's been at least 2-3 weeks since I decided to get the Just for Men out? I mean, they're going to drop me as an official sponsor soon, but you know, when you're wearing a mask every day, it's like, who the hell knows that you're not dyeing your beard anymore? It's kind of inconsequential, other than you guys, and I don't really think you give a damn. But anyway, listen, I've got a number of complimentary plays here for this Saturday card, so let's get right to it. You know, very often when I handicap a lot of games on the card, and I see some of the handicappers here at the site have big plays on some of the games that I didn't use as my best bet, I like to offer them up as a free selection, because about 85% of you that are customers here at the site generally buy the All Access Pass, which means you get access to all the plays of all the handicappers for one price, which today is like $99, which FYI, of course, if you use the 24% discount, you're getting that at a substantial discount as well. And the bottom line is, I like to throw my opinion on those games. And today, for example, for this first game, it's LSU and Auburn in Baton Rouge. Matt Rivers has a big blank check release, I think only the 42nd or 43rd in his 20 years here as a charter member of the site. So I'm going to give you my opinion on the game. You can weigh it against his opinion on the game. See if one of us is right, one of us is wrong, if we're both on the same side or opposite sides, and take it from there. I can tell you one thing about this game. The Tigers are going to win and cover. Yes. Sidebar. A couple of years ago, we're driving cross country. I stopped in Baton Rouge. I like to stop at college campuses all across the country as I'm doing that and check them all out. So we're touring around the stadium. We walk around. And if you've ever been to LSU Stadium, you know they've got Mike's Tiger Den there, and we're walking around, and my wife sees the statue of Mike the Tiger, and she doesn't realize that Mike the Tiger is actually in there, you know, behind there. And she doesn't realize. I say, didn't you see Mike the Tiger? And she walks around the corner of the glass partition, and then she turns, and then she sees Mike the Tiger all in his glory sitting there lying on his back. Yeah, it surprised her. It wasn't the statue, it was the real Mike the Tiger. But anyway, if you ever get to Baton Rouge, you should definitely, not a great campus. I can't say LSU is one of the nicest campuses, very average to mediocre. But, you know, it's an imposing stadium. I mean, it's a neat thing to say that you were Death Valley. But anyway, listen. Since opening the season with that loss to UCLA, LSU has won 3 straight games. I mean, have they played anybody other than Mississippi State, the game they won last week 28-25? Not really. But Max Johnson, the quarterback, has really settled in, 15 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He's played extremely well. Neither one of these teams have been able to run the ball at all. The difference really comes down to the fact that LSU has been playing much better pass defense in Auburn, which I'll get to in a second, and LSU has gotten much better quarterback play with Max Johnson as opposed to Auburn. I have never been enthralled with the fact that Bo Nix has been ordained a couple of years ago as the savior to the Auburn program at quarterback. He has never performed well on the road, as you well know. I talked about it a couple of weeks ago when they went up to Penn State and he played poorly once again. Last week when Auburn was playing at home against Georgia State, he was in fact pulled by Coach Brian Harsin. And he turned to TJ Finley, which is ironic because TJ Finley was a Louisiana high school star. He went to LSU, which was his dream school. He started last year's game in Auburn for LSU, was pulled, a game which I think Auburn won that game 47-11 in the Plains, and benched in favor of Max Johnson. He then transferred to Auburn. He relieved Bo Nix last week in a game which Auburn came back to win against Georgia State as a 27.5-point favorite. They only won that game 34-24. What are you doing beating Georgia State at home 34-24, laying 27.5 points? But listen, Auburn didn't play anybody to open the season. They beat Akron and Alabama State, 2 cupcakes, scored 120 points in that game. Those two opponents only scored 10. They went to Penn State, The final score was an 8-point margin. I think it was 28-20. They were a 5.5 point road dog. But they didn't really play that well in the game. Their pass defense was absolutely awful in that game. In fact, if you look at the latest FBS statistics, their pass defense, 130 Division I schools, or FBS as they like to call it nowadays, they are ranked 126 in terms of opponents' pass completion percentage, as opponents are completing a little over 72% of their passes. So, all things being equal, you're asking me to lay 3 points with LSU at home. I'm going to go with LSU here. Brian Harsin, interesting week for him. He fired his wide receivers coach. He may be switching his quarterbacks tonight. I just don't think this is a good spot to go with Auburn. If it was a 7-point line, I'd say take the road dog. But this is an LSU team that has won, I think, 10 in a row at home in this series. And you got to go with LSU in this spot. Another SEC game. Ole Miss plus the 14.5 points at Alabama. Listen, Nick Saban, is going to motivate his team. They haven't played well, blah, 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 blah. Listen, Ole Miss is coming off a bye. They're a 14.5 point underdog. Has Ole Miss really played anybody? So when everybody's talking about, the Ole Miss defense is so much better this year, the change in their scheme, last year they allowed an SEC worst 38 points a game. This year they're only allowing 21. I guess so. They played Louisville, Tulane, and Austin Peay. Big deal. Look at who Alabama played. Okay, they beat Southern Mississippi last week, but at least, they went to the swamp. They escaped with the win against Florida. They did go to Miami, Florida, or they did play Miami, Florida, in Atlanta, I think it was. At least they played somebody. But the bottom line here is that I would have to take Ole Miss in this contest because they are playing well. This is a team, remember, that led the SEC in rushing last year. Everybody talks about Matt Corral in the passing game and Lane Kiffin, the high-tech offense where they run a play every so many seconds. That's great. But think about the ground game. Rebels led the SEC in rushing last season. And last season they ran for 247 yards against Bama. This year they're the number 2 rushing team in the SEC, averaging 299 yards a game. Who's number 1? Florida. How did Florida give Alabama problems? By running the ball. Now it is true that Florida ran the ball effectively because of their quarterbacks, but Mississippi is going to do a good job, I think, here and keep this one close. Remember last year, Alabama scored touchdowns on their final 8 possessions in Oxford to win that game 63-48. I do not think this game is going to be a barn burner like that. I can see both teams reaching the low 40s, but I think maybe even the high 30s. But I still think Mississippi is going to keep this one within the number because this Alabama team is not as talented offensively. You do not have Mac Jones. You do not have Najee Harris. You do not have the Heisman Trophy winner. This is a team that's still trying to find itself offensively, and you saw defensively that despite Nick Saban's protest that they let their foot off the pedal, blah, 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 and all his excuses in the second half after opening up the big lead against Florida in the swamp, this team has some problems defensively, and I think Lane Kiffin's offense will be able to exploit it, so I would grab the points with Ole Miss in that contest. On the early card, I like Texas in revenge against TCU. I think Texas made a mistake when they started Hudson Card at quarterback in the first 2 games. Listen, the first game, it looked like a genius move. When they went to Arkansas and they got blown away, it wasn't entirely Hudson Card's fault because the defense just couldn't do anything to stop Arkansas. But they went back and they made the switch back to Casey Thompson in the last 2 games. Now, true, they were both at home against Rice and Texas Tech. They won those games easily, beating Texas Tech 70-35. They beat Rice 58-0. They only punted twice in those 2 games and scored 128 points, okay? But Casey Thompson, you may remember, when Sam Erlinger got hurt last year in the Alamo Bowl against Colorado, as a sophomore, he came in and he responded 8 for 10, 170 yards, and 4 touchdowns. And everybody thought that if Tom Herman came back, he would be the quarterback in waiting. Instead, Steve Sarkisian came in, and he did not get the starting job in a close battle in spring and summer camp. But he's shown what he can do. Against Texas Tech, 18 for 23, 303 yards, 5 touchdowns. Against Rice, 15 for 18, 164 yards, 2 touchdowns. That, combined with the fact that Texas has a 3-man deep ground game led by Robinson, who's already run for 436 yards and average a little over 6 yards per carry. That is going to make the difference here against a TCU defense that absolutely couldn't stop anybody 2 weeks ago against Cal, and last week, a game that they got pummeled by SMU. You know, Gary Patterson was whining and such a crybaby after that game, complaining that SMU was mocking his team, complaining they planted a flag in the middle of the field and it was pre-coordinated, complaining that they were mocking him personally by using a song that he had written or sung. I mean, it was such BS. I don't know. Gary Patterson is a great coach, but Gary Patterson really hasn't done anything with TCU for the past couple of years, and that's the fact. SMU ran for 350 yards in that game last week. That was a game that SMU won, right? That's your game plan right there. SMU ran for 350 yards. TCU allowed 15 runs of at least 10 yards in that game. And the SMU quarterback threw for 245 yards and 3 touchdowns as well. TCU's defense has not been a top-notch unit for at least 3 seasons now. I think this is going to be the high-scoring game. This is going to be a barn burner. And I think Texas has all the offensive firepower to juice this one up. I think Texas is going to have problems here, of course, stopping TCU's offense. Listen, TCU is definitely going to, put some points on the board here. But the bottom line, this is a TCU team that opened up by beating Duquesne, escaped beating Cal at home, lost to SMU. Nah, TCU gets revenge here. I don't worry at all with the fact that Texas is going to be playing Oklahoma next week. This is the better, more talented team. End of story. So if I had to rank these 3 plays, I would go LSU number 1, I would go Texas number 2, and then I would go Ole Miss number 3. That'll do it. I wish you well, and I'll talk to you again tomorrow.